question I have been asked many times over the years, sometimes directly after a meeting, a presentation, or a talk, and sometimes in quieter conversations where people are simply curious. And the question almost always sounds the same. How are you so confident? And where does that confidence come from? It is usually asked with the assumption that confidence is something visible and fixed, something that you either naturally carry or something that appears at some point in your life. And I understand why it feels that way when you observe it from the outside. Because when someone speaks clearly, makes decisions without hesitation, or handles situations with a sense of ease, it can look effortless. But if you pause for a moment and reflect on your own experience, you will begin to notice that confidence is not something you feel consistently across every situation. Because there are moments where you feel completely at ease, where your thoughts are clear and your responses come naturally. And then there are other moments where that same clarity seems to fade, where hesitation begins to build, and where you start questioning yourself even though your capability has not changed at all. And that contrast is important because it tells us that confidence is not a personality trait, but something that shifts depending on how prepared you feel, how familiar the situation is, and how clearly you understand what is expected of you, which means it is far more within your influence than it may initially seem. If you're new here, I'm Bhavna, founder of the Inspirated Life Co. And on this channel, we explore leadership, lifestyle, and personal growth through reflection and real-life experience, creating space to think more clearly about how we live, how we work, and how we lead ourselves. What I have come to understand over time is that confidence is often misunderstood because most people assume it comes from how you feel in the moment, when in reality, it is shaped long before that moment arrives, through how you prepare, how you think, and how you understand yourself. Because if you look closely at the situations where confidence feels low, they are often the ones where you feel uncertain, unprepared, or unclear. And in those moments, your mind begins searching for certainty, which often shows up as hesitation, even though nothing about your actual ability has changed. There is a reason for this, because the mind naturally prefers familiarity. And when something feels unfamiliar, it interprets that as risk, which then creates doubt, and that doubt is often mistaken for a lack of confidence, when in reality, it is simply your mind adjusting to something new. And this is where my own experience began to shape how I understand confidence today. For a large part of my career, I worked in environments that were fast-paced, demanding, and often male-dominated, where expectations were not only high, but also constant, and where there was very little space to hesitate or step back in the moment. At the same time, I was managing life outside of work, raising a child, balancing responsibilities that did not pause, and navigating situations that required both resilience and consistency, which meant that waiting to feel confident was simply not an option. I had to show up regardless. I had to make decisions regardless. And I had to trust myself in situations that were not always comfortable or predictable. In those environments, confidence was never something I had the luxury to wait for, because I could not rely on feeling ready in the moment, and instead, I had to rely on being ready for stepping into it, which gradually became a pattern in how I approached every important situation. Before any meeting, interview, presentation, or conversation that mattered, I would spend time understanding the context, thinking through possible questions, anticipating challenges, and preparing myself not just with information, but with a level of clarity that allowed me to show up with intention rather than uncertainty. Because when you are prepared in that way, you are not trying to figure things out as you go along. you're simply expressing what you already understand. And that creates a very different internal experience. One where much of the hesitation and noise that usually comes from uncertainty begins to settle. Over time, this does more than just improve how you perform. It begins to build a sense of trust in yourself, because you're no longer dependent on how you feel in the moment, but on how you have prepared for it beforehand. What I have also found over time is that this way of building confidence is not unique to one person's experience, but something you see reflected in the journeys of many individuals who appear confident on the outside, yet have developed that confidence through consistent effort rather than natural ease. If you listen to someone like Oprah Winfrey, she often speaks about how much work went into understanding her voice, her presence, and the responsibility of the platform she was stepping into. And how the confidence people see today is not something that simply existed from the beginning, but something that has built through preparation, self-awareness, and a willingness to keep showing up even when things felt uncertain. And when you look at it from that perspective, it becomes clear that confidence is rarely about personality and far more about what happens behind the scenes. In the way you prepare, the way you reflect, and the way you continue to engage with situations that stretch you beyond what feels familiar. That is why when people ask me about confidence, my answer has always been quite simple. Because I do not see confidence as something that comes from a feeling, but as something that comes from preparation, and more importantly, from self-awareness. Preparation, in my experience, is not only about knowing your subject or topic, it is also about understanding how you respond under pressure, recognizing your patterns, and becoming familiar with your own reactions so that you are not caught off guard by them when the moment arrives. When you begin to understand both the situation and yourself in this way, your response naturally becomes more grounded. And that is where confidence starts to stabilize. There is also a subtle but important shift that happens when your focus moves away from how you are being perceived and towards what you are contributing. Because the moment your attention is fixed on how you are coming across, your confidence becomes fragile and dependent on external reactions. Whereas when your focus is on what you are saying, what you are adding, and how you are engaging with the situation, something changes internally. And you move away from trying to prove yourself towards simply participating with clarity, which in itself reduces pressure significantly. If you reflect on your own experience, you will likely recognize that the moments where you feel most confident are not random, but are usually connected to the preparation, familiarity, and clarity. And that the moments where your confidence feels lower are often the ones where you are expecting yourself to perform without giving yourself the space to prepare. So the shift here is quite simple but powerful. Instead of asking, how do I become more confident? The question becomes, how can I prepare better for what I am stepping into? And how I can understand myself better in the process. Because confidence is not something you wait for. It is something you build through what you do before the moment, not just in the moment. If you feel like this is something you've been experiencing, where confidence feels inconsistent or you are unsure how to build it in the way that feels genuine and sustainable, then this is exactly the kind of work I explore more deeply through my Clarity and Confidence Reset one-on-one sessions. These sessions are not about quick fixes or surface level motivation, but about understanding your patterns, building clarity, and creating a more grounded sense of confidence that comes from within rather than from external validation. If that feels relevant for you, you'll find the details in the description. In the next video, we're going to explore discipline and why it is often misunderstood as something restrictive, when in reality, it is what creates consistency, structure, and freedom in how you live and work. Until then, simply begin to notice where you can prepare a little more, understand yourself a little better, and show up with greater clarity. Because confidence is not something you wait for, it is something you build. You take care of yourselves and stay inspirited. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.